Hello, military friends and families. This is From the Frontlines. Today, I want to talk about eating disorders in the military, and I want to be very clear from the start. This is not a small-scale issue. It is not rare, and it is not something that only affects one type of service member. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, eating disorders affect both active duty service members and veterans, and research shows they occur at rates similar to or higher than the civilian population. What makes this even more concerning is that eating disorders in military populations are often underdiagnosed, meaning many people are struggling without ever being counted or treated. The VA also makes something else clear. Military service includes unique risk factors that increase vulnerability to eating disorders: chronic stress, exposure to trauma, military sexual trauma, strict body composition standards, repeated weigh-ins, fitness testing, and a culture that values control, endurance, and pushing through pain. In the military, your body is not just personal. It is monitored. It is evaluated. It determines deployability. It determines career progression. It determines whether you are seen as ready or replaceable. That pressure matters. The VA recognizes multiple types of eating disorders among service members and veterans, including anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and other disordered eating behaviors that don't always fit clean labels. Binge eating disorder, in particular, is identified as the most common eating disorder, including among men, which matters because the military is predominantly male, and eating disorders in men are often overlooked or dismissed. This is important to say plainly. Eating disorders do not look the same in military populations as they do in stereotypes. They do not always involve extreme weight loss. They often involve cycles of restriction and binging, excessive exercise beyond injury, rigid food rules, and deep shame tied performance and appearance. And here is something both the VA and military research consistently point to. Many service members do not seek help, not because they don't want support, but because they fear the consequences. They fear career impact. They fear losing clearance or deployability. They fear being labeled weak. They fear becoming a liability instead of a teammate. So instead of asking for help, they adapt. They normalize behaviors that slowly harm them. They call it discipline. They call it standards. They call it resilience. Guard and reserve members face added risk. The VA notes that inconsistent access to care, frequent transitions between civilian and military systems, and reduced visibility can allow eating disorders to go unnoticed or untreated for long periods of time. Veterans face another layer. The VA reports that eating disorders often persist or worsen after service, especially during transition out of the military. Loss of structure, loss of identity, unresolved trauma, and isolation can intensify disordered eating behaviors that were hidden or managed during active service. Military sexual trauma is also a critical factor. VA data consistently shows a strong association between MST and eating disorders, particularly among women veterans, but not exclusively. Trauma that impacts bodily autonomy can profoundly shape relationships with food, control, and self-worth. Families and caregivers often see this first. They notice skipped meals. They notice binging followed by shame. They notice compulsive exercise. They notice language that sounds more like punishment than health. But eating disorders don't fit the image many people have of military struggle. So families often question themselves instead of the system. This is not a lack of discipline. This is not vanity. This is not weakness. The VA is clear that eating disorders are serious mental health conditions, often co-occur with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and increased suicide risk. These issues are connected. They are not separate conversations. You cannot talk about suicide prevention in the military without talking about eating disorders. You cannot talk about readiness without talking about health. And you cannot talk about service without talking about what service does to the body and mind. The VA does provide screening, treatment, and recovery-focused care for veterans with eating disorders, including outpatient and inpatient options. Recovery is possible, but only when people feel safe enough to be honest without punishment. That safety is cultural. It is peer-driven. It is leadership-driven. It is family-supported. This is why the Dwyer programs exists. To name what gets ignored. To talk about what doesn't show up in formation. and to remind people that struggling does not cancel out service. If this resonates with you or someone you love, hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not weak. And asking for help does not erase your service. It protects your life. This is From the Frontlines, and you are not alone. If you would like to connect with the Dwyer program, visit the Dwyer Coalition website. You can also visit our social media platforms where we connect the community to all the Dwyer programs and our community partners across New York State. So share, and all that good stuff, and don't forget to take care of yourself.